Good morning, everyone. It's Thursday, July 2nd, and it's a hot, humid day here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina. And today I want to teach you how to plant one of North America's secret fruit trees, the pawpaw. The pawpaw tree is part of the asimina family, and that includes fruits like the custard apple, the cherimoya, the sweet sop, and the sour sop. And if you've never heard of any of those fruits before, there's a really good reason. Those fruits are extremely tropical fruits, and they can't tolerate even the slightest frost or freeze in most cases. So unless you grew up or you've spent a lot of time in tropical climates, you've probably never come across any of those fruits. The pawpaw is in that family of fruits. However, there is something that makes the pawpaw very unique. The pawpaw, in fact, grows in its native habitat from North Florida all the way to southern Ontario, Canada. And it grows throughout the entire eastern half of the country. So just simply walking around in undisturbed woods, it's entirely possible that you will come across a pawpaw patch. And while the pawpaw is part of a very tropical fruit family, it is very cold hardy, and it naturally grows from zones 5 through 9. Which is the overwhelming majority of the United States of America. So that makes the pawpaw tree an extremely diverse tree that most people in this country can grow. The heritage of the pawpaw tree within the United States of America is very long and storied. In fact, cold pawpaws were actually George Washington's favorite dessert. And if that sounds a little strange to you, picture this. While I have never had a pawpaw's fruit before, everything that I've researched has told me that it has a custard-like texture, almost like pudding, and the flavors have hints of vanilla, mango, and banana. Also consider that refrigeration and freezing technology has only been around for several decades. So if you're George Washington and then you move down to Virginia where it is so much more hot and humid during the summer, and then you break yourself out a nice cold pawpaw, that is probably the closest thing to ice cream that our founding fathers could have had. And seriously, who doesn't like ice cream? So if the flavor and texture profile of the pawpaw sounds interesting to you, you may want to consider growing these as a low to no maintenance fruit tree in your garden. However, before you go ahead and do that, there are a few things about pawpaws that you need to know. The first thing that you need to know about pawpaw trees is they are understory trees. They only grow to be about 20 feet tall. So in their native habitat, they grow under canopies of larger trees. And because of that, the young pawpaw trees are extremely susceptible to damage from the sun because they grow in almost total shade when they're young. Most nurseries will recommend that you grow them protected from the sun for the first 3 seasons or so, because once the trees reach about 3 or 4 years old, they're able to put on enough height that they're able to start breaking through the forest canopy and get their own mostly sunny conditions. And once they're about 3 or 4 years old, the trees they become hardened off to where they can take full sun. And it's recommended that you plant your pawpaw trees in a sunny location and you place shade cloth over them. You may be asking, why don't I just plant them in a shady location, because that's their native habitat when they're young? And the answer to that question is because they actually fruit a lot better in full sun. So in order to have maximum production, you should plant them in a full sun location, but shade them with shade cloth for the first 3 seasons. And in my research, the best results were using anywhere from 30 to 50% shade cloth. So I went ahead and I purchased this, which is a 10-foot by 20-foot piece of 40% shade cloth. And if you're curious where to buy this, I have it linked in my Amazon storefront in the video description. It was only $30, so this is a very inexpensive way to permanently protect your young trees for the first 3 years. The second thing that you need to know about pawpaws is that they are not self-fertile. They need cross-pollination in order to set fruit. So here I have 2 different named varieties of pawpaw trees. This one right here is a grafted variety that is called Nyomi's Delicious, which is an early pawpaw, and this right here is a late season pawpaw, which is an Italian cultivar called Prima. And in order to maximize pollination, you have to plant the trees very close together. So anywhere from 6 to 8 feet is recommended, so the trees grow into each other and they have maximum cross-pollination. So you will need a minimum of 2 trees. However, it is important to note that if you're buying named grafted varieties, you can't simply buy two of the same tree. They have to be genetically different trees. So if I were to purchase two Nyomi's Delicious and plant them next to each other, because they're grafted cuttings from the same mother tree, they're genetically identical. So you can plant two trees, but to the Pawpaw, it's only one tree. They have to have different genetics, and these two trees have different genetics. If you simply purchase a Pawpaw tree grown from seed, any two seedlings will grow, because any fruit trees grown from seed are going to have different genetics. They're going to be genetically different plants, just like people are all different genetically. And the third and final thing that you have to know about pawpaws is when you purchase your trees, you have to acclimate them to the sun before you go ahead and plant them, even with shade protection. As you can see, these trees are very small, and when you purchase trees from nurseries, they're generally kept in greenhouses where they get filtered sun and greenhouse fabric. It blocks a lot of UV radiation. So you have to put these on an acclimation schedule. So the way I did this was, when I received these trees in the mail, the very first day, I watered them well, and I kept them inside my garage in total shade. Then the next morning, I brought them out in the morning sun, and for day one, I gave them 30 minutes of direct morning sun. Day two, I gave them an hour of direct morning sun. Day three, I gave them an hour and a half, and on days 4 through 7, I gave them 2 hours of direct morning sun. And I like to use the morning sun because it is a lot less harsh and has less strong radiation than the afternoon sun. So these trees are hardened off and they're ready to go, because even with 40% shade protection, they're still getting 60% sun. So they have to be tolerant of at least the morning sun before you can just willy-nilly bring them out from a nursery. And that goes for virtually every fruit tree or any kind of plant that you buy from a nursery. You always want to harden them off first. Oh, and one more thing interesting about the pawpaw, the flowers on the pawpaw trees are actually not pollinated by bees. They're actually pollinated by flies. The aroma of the flowers are akin to that of rotting meat. So the flowers smell very bad, and they actually attract flies, and it's the flies that fly back and forth from each of the stinky flowers that pollinate the tree. And in my research, a way that people actually increase the fruit set and pollination of the trees is they hang banana peels from the limbs of the trees, because that attracts more flies. Some people also put bits of meat up in the tree, but I would recommend against that because that may attract mammal pests, and that's not really what we want. So when you plant your pawpaw trees, try to pick a full sun location, but don't plant them right next to your house, because they will attract flies and you may not like the odor of the tree. These are a very low maintenance, almost pest and disease free tree grown in their native climates in North America. So you can put these pretty far towards the back of your yard and neglect them quite a bit compared to most fruit trees. They don't need to be right up front because they're native to here and they are so low maintenance. Now it's just about noon here, so the sun is getting pretty strong. So I'm going to leave these trees in the shade while I show you how to build your planting hole and get your shade protection infrastructure up and ready for these trees. And you may be asking yourself, if pawpaws are native to the area and they've been around for centuries, if not millennia, how come I've never heard of them? And the answer to that question is very simple. It's because they don't ship or store well. They are very fragile fruits that bruise very easily, and they have a short ripening season that happens from late August to late September, depending on where you live and what variety of pawpaw that you're growing. And when it comes to commercial varieties of fruit trees, varieties are not selected based on how good they taste. They are selected on how bruise resistant they are for easy shipping, and for how long they can store on the shelf at grocery stores before they start rotting. So fruits are actually selected for their durability and their transportability, so they can be profitable to grow in a commercial orchard. They are not selected for taste. And it just so happens to be that taste usually is inversely proportional to durability. The best tasting fruits tend to have thin skin and bruise very easily and ripen very easily, and unfortunately rot on your counter very easily. And that's why the foods that we get in the grocery stores just don't taste as good as what we get in the home garden. So when it comes to pawpaw trees and pretty much all of the best tasting fruits out there on earth, if you want to have it, you have to grow it yourself. And this right here is the location that I will be planting my pawpaw trees. It gets full sun. It gets a solid 10 hours of sun every single day but the sun actually tracks behind these trees after about 4 p.m. So right in late afternoon it starts getting some shade, which is actually not a bad thing to get some afternoon shade while getting the full morning sun. Also, my house is all the way over there, so I'm a solid 50 plus feet away from my house, and that's where I want to be because I actually don't want to attract flies nearby my house. And if this seems like a turnoff to you, that you don't want a tree that attracts flies, well, consider this. If you're planting the tree away from your house, you will actually be attracting the flies away from your house. And we call this distraction cropping in gardening and farming. So while it may attract flies to the property, it will actually isolate them in an area away from your house. So while you may get more flies in your property in general, they may be less likely to be where you want to sit and be around your house, which could actually be a good thing. And I want to show you how I went ahead and prepared this area. What I did was I ran a rototiller that had about a foot's deep worth of coverage, and I tilled up all of that dirt, and then I used a square shovel to take away all of that, all of the grass, because I don't want my small trees with their small root systems competing with a very vigorous grass. So it's important that you don't have any weeds around your trees when you planted them. And you'll also notice that the dirt is quite a bit higher, and I'm also going to leave this as kind of like a drainage ditch. Because I want this area to be significantly higher than the soil around it, because I want it to be well draining and I want all of the rainwater to run off. So I'm lucky I have a nice good sandy soil right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plant my trees a little high, and then I'm going to amend them with compost and wood chips. And eventually I'm going to fill in this whole area with a thick layer of wood chips when I'm able to get a chip drop from a local arborist. The first thing that you'll notice right here is that I have two shovels. On the left, you'll see a digging shovel, and on the right, you'll see a square shovel. And this holds true for any fruit tree that you decide to plant. Never dig the entire hole with the digging shovel on the left. And the reason why is because that shovel will give you a round, smooth-walled hole. And what happens is you're creating a medium gradient. You're creating a difference in mediums that your tree will grow in. So when you dig a hole with a shovel on the left, you're creating a round, smooth-walled basket where inside that basket you have this nice loosened up soil, and then the native soil around it is not loose. It's compact because it's never been disturbed before. So your very fragile young seedlings with their small roots are going to wind up spiraling their roots almost like they're growing in a container, and they're going to have trouble sending young roots into the native soil that hasn't been disturbed. So what I like to do is I start the hole with the digging shovel, but I finish it off with the square shovel because the square shovel leaves sharp edges, and I also use the ends of the shovel to rough up the hole quite a bit because that allows the young roots to more easily penetrate that native soil. I also like to loosen up a large quantity of soil. As you can see here, this little tiny tree is nothing compared to this large hole. And I like to dig up a large area so the tree can get larger and the roots can become more hardened and lignified before they start penetrating the surrounding soil. So I always make sure to over dig my hole. And I'm going to wind up backfilling that hole 90% of the way with the native soil, and I'm going to mix in just a little bit of cow manure compost into the hole just to give a little bit of slow release nutrition, but I don't want it to change up the soil medium too much because I don't want to give my tree a really easy time to grow in this new soil to the point where it doesn't want to send roots into the existing native soil. You'll also see right here that I have a total of 3 holes dug, and that's because I just had to make an emergency change of plan. So what I intended to do was stick one tree here into the first hole that I just showed you, and then I was going to stick another tree here into this hole. And as I started digging into this hole, it started filling up with water. And we received about 1.5 inches of rain over the past 2 days, so there's clearly some kind of underground stream that is running through here. I cannot plant my pawpaw trees in a hole that fills up with water. So I'm going to have to put a tree in there that is okay with having wet feet, maybe something like a palmetto or an alocasia or a banana or something like that, something that can tolerate having wet roots. But what I did was I dug this hole and this hole has a sandy bottom, and it is much better in terms of not filling up with water than the other hole does. And all of the soil is pretty moist right now because of all the rain, but I can't have a hole that accumulates water. And now that my holes are dug, I'm going to start backfilling them, and I'm going to use almost all native soil because I don't want to create a big soil gradient between the soil around the hole and the soil inside the hole. But for nutrients, I am going to add a few shovelfuls of this organic cow manure compost that I simply bought off the shelf at Lowe's. And I'm going to fill in this hole pretty much all the way, while also mixing in that cow manure compost like this. And now that our planting hole has been backfilled and amended with compost, I'm also going to amend it with some of this Miracle-Gro Nature's Care organic vegetable, fruit, and flower food fertilizer. Pawpaw trees are very fragile when they're young, so you shouldn't give them any kind of harsh chemical fertilizers until they establish. In fact, if you can go with never giving them harsh chemical fertilizers and only going organic, that's a great thing. I would suggest that. For amending this planting hole, I just want to add a little bit of organic fertilizer. And pretty much any organic fertilizer will do. Something around a 4.44 or a 5.55 strength will work, but if you can't find that, just get something with numbers that are close together. But it has to be organic because organic fertilizers are not readily available to the plant. They feed the worms and the bacteria and the fungi in the soil, so they won't burn your fruit trees. So I'm going to basically add 2 reasonable handfuls, and then I'm just going to take my shovel and I'm going to mix it in to the planting hole in the top 6 inches or so, and then I'm going to leave a little gully for me to put my fruit tree. And in order to do that, I'm probably just going to go ahead and do that by hand. And you want to make sure that compost is mixed in and that organic fertilizer is spread around. And again, we're going to plant our fruit trees a little high. And I want to show you how to carefully take this fruit tree out of this container because you do not want to disturb the roots. And the other thing you cannot do is you cannot bury the graft if you get a grafted tree. So right here on this tree, you can see this line where the graft was made. That's the cut. This down here is rootstock. This right here is the scion wood, which is the named variety that is grafted on top of the rootstock, and it's held together with this tape. So what you have to do is you have to carefully remove this fruit tree from the container so you do not disturb the roots as much as possible. And the way I like to do that is I like to squeeze the base of the tree and always turn it upside down. Never rip your fruit tree out from the top. So I'm going to gently squeeze, and it is really in there. So you gently push and the bottom will come right off, and then you can see all of the roots down here. I'm going to stand that up. Try to disturb it as little as possible. And remember, never bury the graft. We're going to plant it actually a little bit high because I want to put compost around the fruit tree, and because my soil here is a little bit damp, I don't want it sitting in wet feet. So I'm going to just sprinkle a little bit of organic fertilizer on the top of the soil, and I'm going to bring the soil around the fruit tree to hold it steady. Then I'm going to pull the native soil around it to encompass the fruit tree. I'm going to press it down just like this. And then I'm going to take more of my cow manure compost and I'm going to spread it around the tree, just like this. And I want to keep a little gap between the compost and the wood of the tree because I don't want anything that will rot and break down touching the wood of the tree, because that wood is susceptible to rot and compost does break down. So we want to keep it a little bit away from the tree. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my foot and I'm going to gently press down around the tree to make sure that it is secure in the hole. and that there are no air pockets in the planting hole. If there are air pockets in the planting hole, your tree will die. So you want to press it down to make sure there are no air pockets, but not press it down so firmly that you ruin the soil and you make it too hard for the tree to grow. So now I put my feet down. I think we're all good here. I'm going to put some of the native soil around to prevent the compost from washing away. And the final thing we're going to do is we're going to mulch this tree to keep the compost from washing away and to keep the soil evenly moist. Now that our trees have been planted, backfilled, fertilized, and the area around it has been regraded and cleaned up, we're going to apply our mulch. And it is very important that you apply mulch because mulch does several things. Firstly, it protects your roots from the hot rays of the sun and it keeps them nice and cool. Second, it retains even moisture. If there's no mulch, the top layer of the soil dries out quickly. So putting down a mulch layer helps keep the top layer of soil nice and evenly moist. Third, it suppresses weeds, and weeds will compete with your young fruit tree roots for nutrients, so the more weed suppression, the better. And fourth, it will break down over time and it will slowly feed your soil and keep it healthy. What you use for mulch is up to you. Just do not use a dyed mulch. It has to be something that is completely natural. So I'm using a natural shredded hardwood mulch from Lowe's, but any kind of natural mulch will work. You can use pine bark nuggets, you can use grass clippings, you can use bags of dried up leaves, you can use arborist wood chips. Just don't use dyed mulches because they contain chemical dyes and they are not good for your soil. You can also use something like a cedar or a cypress mulch, but be aware that while those mulches are natural, those are rot resistant woods, so while they will keep your soil nice and evenly moist, they don't do a good job at decomposing quickly and feeding your soil. So I wouldn't use things like redwood, cedar, and cypress unless that's the only natural mulch you can get your hands on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dump this bag of mulch around my tree, and I want it to be in a layer that's about 3 inches thick. But it is also very important that you do not allow the mulch to touch the trunk of the tree because that could cause the tree to rot. So I'm going to spread the mulch around, making sure to keep it a few inches away from the tree, and that's also going to have an added benefit because it's going to create a watering ring around my tree. And now that our trees have been planted and they've been mulched, it's time to water them in. And to water the pawpaw trees in, we're going to supplement them with a little bit of this Alaska fish fertilizer, which is an organic fertilizer that's made out of ground up fermented fish. Now again, we're going to avoid using any kind of synthetic chemical fertilizers because young pawpaw trees are very fragile, but this is a great source of nutrients, and because it's such a weak fertilizer, it won't burn. If you cannot use fish fertilizer because of the smell, and the smell attracts animals, you can use seaweed or kelp fertilizer instead. And if you need to know where to get any of these things, you can purchase it linked in my Amazon storefront in the video description. So we're going to take this and we are going to shake it up, and then I'm going to pour in just a couple second glug into this watering can, which probably will be about a quarter cup or so. And then we're going to fill the watering can up, and this is a 1.5 gallon watering can. And I find that things like fish fertilizer or kelp extract is really great at preventing transplant shock. So as I said right here, we created a gap, a separation between the mulch and the trunk of the tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill and water in very well the tree with half of this 1.5 gallon watering can with the fish emulsion solution in it. And I'm also going to soak down the leaves because this also makes an excellent foliar feed as well. And we're going to do that to both trees. Now that everything is planted, fertilized, mulched, and watered in, we're going to build our sun protection. And to do that, I have 3 4-foot stakes. And I made these out of 8-foot furring strips that are about $1.50 a piece at your local big box store. I cut them in half and then I sharpen the bottoms to a point with a simple handsaw. And I'm going to pound these into the ground around the fruit tree. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap one of these 3-foot garden fences around the fruit tree, and that is going to create protection for me to put my sunshade and create a shaded environment. And remember, your pawpaw tree is going to grow protected for probably 3 seasons, so you want to make it fairly large because you don't want to have to change this out every few months that the tree gets larger. And this probably won't make it a full 3 years before it's too large, but it is good enough at least for a season or 2 before I may have to go to something like a 4-foot welded wire fence and maybe expand the area out a little bit. So I'm going to take my very inexpensive garden fence and I'm going to tie it to all of these supports that I made. And remember, what we're building is not structural here. All it has to do is just create enough support that it safely keeps the sunshade from crushing the plants. We want to make sure that it holds everything nice and firmly and just provides some protection. Also, it will have an added benefit that it'll keep any curious animals that may come and gnaw your trees down to a stump away from your trees. So you will get protection from things like rabbits and squirrels and other annoying pests like that. So now we have this in place. I'm just going to put a couple of ties on all the stakes just to make sure this doesn't blow away or go anywhere. And then I'll do this to the second tree and we'll place our shade cloth. And now that I have both cages built for support, I have laid out the 40% shade cloth. So now that it's been stretched out, we're going to go ahead and we're going to place it on top of our trees, and that will block 40% of the sunlight. So we're just going to pull the shade cloth up over the barriers, and that's really all we need to do because the fence behind it is obviously going to block all of the sun. But because I bought a 10-foot piece of shade cloth, it will in fact cover the entire trees. And the other thing that I did was I made sure to buy a shade cloth that has these grommets in the bottom because I want to be able to secure the shade cloth to the ground. So I'm going to use garden staples and I'm going to weave them into the grommets, and the garden staples will hold the shade cloth in place so the wind does not blow it away. And here's the final product. Both pawpaw trees are protected, and I have the 40% shade cloth that is placed over the pawpaw trees. So now I have a really easy situation in my hands because when I want to, all I have to do is take this shade cloth and lower it. And when I lower it like this, the pawpaw trees are completely protected. Then I can just take my garden staple and I can press the staples into the ground, and that will hold the pawpaw trees in place. Now, when I want to check on these trees periodically and do things like water them or check them for growth and restake them or replace the small stakes with a taller stake, all I have to do is pull out the garden stake and I can simply lift this up like this, and I will be able to access my pawpaw trees. And you can clearly see in here by the way that the pawpaw trees are enclosed that they have plenty of room to grow, so this should be very good for a season or 2, and I shouldn't have to modify this much until they get significantly along in their growth. So we'll leave the shade cloth on like this, and we will just periodically check every day on the trees to make sure that they aren't wilting and that they get water every day until they establish. And that's how you plant pawpaw trees. Everyone, thank you so much for watching today's video. If you found it helpful, please hit that like button, and if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe for future updates and more videos like these. If you're curious about anything I use in my garden in general or any of the things that I used in this video, everything that I use is listed in my Amazon storefront in the video description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video.